Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions. I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters, Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. I'm very excited today. First of all, tonight, Matt Bonser, Director of Admission at Colorado College, and our own Hillary Dickman, Senior Assistant Director of College Admissions from Colorado College, will be joining our Counselors Connect to talk to us about how does the school manage it when they have ED, NEA, and RD, all three of these rounds of admissions. Now, we could use more public school college counselors, more CBO college counselors, and more independent school college counselors in our group. So if you're interested, just go to yourcollegebounkid.com, click the resources tab, and you'll see the Counselors Connect application. On today's episode, I want to play Nicole's question again from last week about the changes, the Republican tax bill, sometimes called the OBBB. I will briefly cover the things I never talked about last week, and then I want to spend most of my time answering Nicole's question directly. I'm then going to do something that is a little lighthearted. I'm going to share the two worst student essays I ever read. I'm not going to read them. I'm just going to summarize them, but I think you'll get a chuckle out of this one. One was in 2023 and one was in 2016. I'm going to give you an admissions tip when it comes to writing the Y essay, and then we'll have the final segment with Chris Teare. So let's dive in. So I want to start by correcting something I said last week. And sometimes it's good to be wrong, and this was a case where I was happy to be wrong. So last week I said Congress changed the definition of a full-time student from 12 credit hours to 15 credit hours. And that Pell eligibility has always been, you have to be a half-time student. So 7.5 credit hours, half of 15 instead of 6. And I expressed my concern with how this would impact students who had to work full-time or single moms that had 2 or 3 kids. But what I missed was that this was in the original version of the bill, but it was stripped from the final version of the bill. So the final version actually kept full-time student status at, and therefore Pell eligibility remaining at half-time status or 6 credit hours. Just wanted to correct that. Now, one other change for loans that I never brought up last week when I talked about loans that I think is worth mentioning. It has to do with how deferment is going to be handled. So deferment is if you fall on hard times and you can't pay your bills. Now, the current law allows you to defer your payments, for up to 1 full year, and you can do this up to 4 different times. And this was one of the protections that you get in federal loans, and there's no way a private loan can match something like that when they're trying to, make money for donors or for stockholders. If it's a publicly traded company, and if it's just privately owned for the company. This is very appealing. Now, this has been changed for the subsidized loan in the new bill. Okay? It's not like they have completely got rid of forbearance, but there are major changes in deferment. Now, a lot of times people confuse deferment and forbearance. What's the difference? The difference has to do with whether or not you're paying interest during that time you're not paying the loan off. So in either case, it refers to a time when you're not making payments because maybe you're unemployed or underemployed. And they have changed it now so that the deferment piece is going to be gone. So the interest is going to be accruing. Forbearance is also limited. Before you could have 1 year forbearance up to 4 times. Now you can have up to 9 months of forbearance over a 2-year period. However, this only applies to loans that go into effect after July 2027. So 2 years from now is when this will take effect. So I talked a lot about changes to loan repayment last time. I talked a lot about endowment. I talked a lot about the Pell Grant, but that's something I thought was worth including that I never mentioned when I did the changes in the loans. I haven't shared every single change. Some of the stuff is really deep in the weeds. I've tried to pick the things that I thought would be most of interest to our listeners. Now, in the new bill, if colleges are graduating students from undergraduate programs where the graduates do not earn more than the medium high school grads aged 25 to 34 in their state, the college can lose its federal aid. Now, a lot of states will just list this as 150% of the poverty line. And then for grad school programs, it's more stringent. Grads need to make 3 times the amount of the poverty line on average, or these colleges can lose their federal funding. So what do I think about this? Well, on one hand, it's understandable. You don't want college students taking out loan debt, or even if they don't take out loan debt. You don't want college students going off for 4 years if in most instances they're not going to make more than what they would have made with a high school diploma. But I do have some concerns, and here's why. The way I see colleges applying this is getting rid of some of the degrees that don't lead to higher pay. Elementary education in some states doesn't lead to higher pay, but we need elementary school teachers. There are a lot of things in education that are great for training your mind, but the graduates don't necessarily have high incomes. I would rather see that be highly publicized so there's no surprise at all, then get rid of some really good programs. Not everything has to just be transactional. And I fear that's where we're going. Everything's just transactional. That's one of the reasons for the emphasis on STEM, 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 STEM. Sure, it's great because there's great needs out there and a lot of people have interest in STEM, but it's also causing other things which can be incredibly strong programs. It's like something like philosophy, it's training you to be a critical thinker, and getting rid of things like that. Foreign languages is another. So I just have some concerns about that, although I think it's well-intentioned. And I don't think people should be graduating with degrees that tend to pay less, and they're completely benighted and have no idea that that's going to happen. Keep in mind, there's also people that graduate in some of those programs with those degrees that make a tremendous amount of money because around 3/4 of people don't work in something directly related to their degree. So a lot of it is, once again, the person inside the shoes, not the shoes on your feet. But that does not mean that I don't think it's important information. I think people should have knowledge of this. And this is not brand new to the Trump administration. I mean, the whole focus and I like Artie Duncan, who worked with Obama and college scorecard. I mean, that whole focus started in 2008, was designed to bring more financial accountability to colleges in the way of earnings. And the clear implication there was more transparency. And the transparency is good. So I like the transparency. I just don't necessarily like the cutting of funding. That's just my view. All right. So there are also some changes with 529 accounts. And it's not a major change, more of a minor change. A few years ago was when the major change occurred, when 529s could cover like $10K for private school costs, elementary or secondary. This new law also allows some of that 529 money to be used for some dual enrollment expenses. Now, let's get into Nicole's question. I'm going to play it, and then I'm going to answer it.
Hi, Mark. My name is Nicole, and I'm a rising freshman heading to a women's college on the East Coast. My mom is an avid listener who doesn't miss an episode. In fact, your interview with the Dean of Enrollment Management at my upcoming college shifted it from being in my top 3 to becoming firmly my number 1, so thank you. My questions today are specifically about the big, beautiful bill. This bill is feeling like a nightmare for me as a first-generation, low-income student with dreams of going to med school. For all of us who will be impacted, will you please do a deep dive and break down the impacts of this bill for undergraduate, graduate, and professional students? Also, should I, a rising freshman in college, strongly consider alternate paths other than medicine? What specific actionable advice would you impart on students like me just starting their college journey in light of the changes the big, beautiful bill will create?
Okay, I cannot come any stronger than I'm going to come right now. Nicole, I unequivocally, irrefutably, and indisputably disagree with you changing your plans for medical school because of the Republican tax bill. No, 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 and no. And I have 4 reasons for that. Well, the first overall reason is that the bill just should not impact you, I think, as much as you may be thinking. The original proposals were really bad, right? I mean, the curtailing of Pell Grant funding, the stripping and literally getting rid of all subsidized loans. That would have been really bad, but that stuff never made it into the final bill. So let me go over 4 reasons why I feel really strongly about this. So obviously the big expense if you go off and achieve your goals to become a doctor is medical school, right? That's where the cost, the average person is spending over $300,000 these days to go to medical school, especially if you're going to private schools. But on average, those dentist numbers and medical school numbers, they're really high. And I'm sure that's the fear. And you're looking at the bill and you're saying, well, it caps loans at $50,000. That's $200K. You know, we don't have any money, so how am I going to come up with the cost to pay for it? But rest assured, you have a lot more options than you think. And let me go over a few of them. One of them is that there are completely tuition-free med schools out there. Okay? The Kaiser Permanente School, Bernard J. Tyson School of Medicine, California. Now, that's tuition and fees, which, by the way, starting with the entering class of 2000, through the first 5-6 cohorts, and my understanding is that will be renewed. Then you have what's going on at NYU with Grossman School of Medicine, both New York City and the Long Island branch. Every student getting full tuition scholarship, regardless of need or merit. No repayment required. Okay, this is the generosity of donors. The Long Island campus got a huge gift. Then we have what Case Western Reserve is doing with their Cleveland Clinic and Lerner College of Medicine, full tuition scholarship for all students. We have what Albert Einstein College of Medicine is doing in the Bronx, starting in August of 2024, tuition fully covered for all students. Okay, $1 billion donation there. We have what's happening at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine in Baltimore, beginning fall of 2024. Tuition free for any family earning under $300K. And if you're under-resourced, then you're making under $300K. If families earn $175K, living expenses also covered. And there's other programs as well. There's a brand new program just started in the cohort of 2025 in Bentonville, Arkansas. It's the Alice L. Walton School of Medicine. If you recognize that name, Alice Walton, these are the founders of Walmart. That's why Walmart's headquartered in Arkansas, right? This is covering tuition for the first 5 classes, okay, with no specific service obligation, by the way. So there's just a lot of opportunities out there. And the second thing is they're growing. More and more and more people are funding these kinds of programs. So that's the first thing. Now, you know, I know what some of you are thinking. Those are super, super competitive, and they are. But there's just a lot of other options. And one other option is there's full merit-based scholarships out there at some med schools. David Geffen School of Medicine, UCLA, covers full cost of attendance, room, board, books, supplies for about 1 in 4 students in the class. Okay? There's the Will Cornell Medicine Program, need-based full ride scholarships, tuition, and living expenses. Okay, replacing loans entirely. We've got some stuff going on with the Village Scholarship that meets 100% of demonstrated need for eligible students. That's at Columbia. We have what WashU is doing, full tuition scholarship for approximately half of students, merit and need, and then partial aid to so many more. And then we have a bunch of other schools that are doing merit-based med school stuff, including Emory, UPenn, Michigan, Harvard, Stanford, Duke, Vanderbilt, the Mayo Clinic, and George Washington. Okay? Those are just some of the opportunities that are out there for you to not have to worry about high costs of medicine. And there's more. That's not the only thing. You should know that this is my third point, right? The first point is there's a lot of these programs out there with free offers, need and merit-based, okay, like completely covering. And then you have the merit-based public schools and private, which are doing a lot of special programming. The third thing I want to talk about is there are a lot of states that have very special in-state pricing for medical school students. If you live in Texas, they've really got some special stuff, but California's got some special stuff as well. You know, New Mexico is an example. They've got one of the most affordable in-state options, $20,000 to $21,000 on average for in-state students. And so many of the Texas schools offer great in-state. And I talk more about the Texas schools, but I want to bring them up in another point I'm going to make in a second. East Carolina's got some great pricing for North Carolina students. Florida State's got some great pricing for North Carolina students. University of Arkansas has got some great prices for in-state students. Louisiana State, it's $12 to $13K, one of the lowest in the country. All right? So there are a lot of options for in-state. And then some of you might be listening to this, and Nicole, you may be one of them, and you may be saying, I'm not hearing my state mentioned. So here's the next option. There are some amazing public med schools that have very low rates for out-of-state tuition. Out-of-state tuition. In fact, 7 of the 10 Texas schools, remember I said I bring the Texas schools up? 7 of the 10 Texas schools have the lowest out-of-state tuition in the country. Okay, we're talking about major schools like Texas A&M, $34,860. UT Austin, Dell Medical School, $38,800. Rio Grande Valley, $37,100. UT Southwestern Medical Center, $39,600. Texas Tech Health Sciences Center, $39,600. University of Texas, San Antonio, Long School of Medicine, $40,000. And of course, New Mexico, I mentioned them as well, but they have fantastic rates for out-of-state students as well. Now, let's talk about some additional public medical schools with very, very reasonable out-of-state tuition. University of Cincinnati, College of Medicine, $57,300. Central Florida, $59,800. Remember, the big, beautiful bill allows $50K for professional up to $200,000. So you're getting most of it covered just here. All right. University of Florida College of Medicine, $52,000 out of state. And there's more, but those are some right there that I can share. There's also some key considerations to think about. And this is maybe the thing I'm even the most excited about. But before I share this, I'm going to share a story with you. And this is 20 years ago. I was visiting San Antonio, and there were big signs up that said, we are offering bilingual dentists $150,000 signing bonus. And I tell that story to almost all of my students. I say, learn Spanish. It's going to be very helpful for you as a young student, given the demographics of this country. I don't care how many people you try to deport, Spanish is going to grow in this country. It's going to be very helpful for you to be bilingual with Spanish and English. That was 20 years ago. That could go a long ways to wiping out a dental bill, a medical bill. And by the way, I focused a lot on the word doctor because that was Nicole's aspiration. But I'm going to share something now that's great for health professionals, including nurses. And there are just some major loan repayment services for students if they will go in an underserved area, which is usually urban or rural. These programs have been going on for a really, really long time. I remember when we first moved in 1995 from Dallas to Philadelphia. We were living in West Mount Airy, Upsall Garden Apartments for you Philadelphia listeners. And the person right beside us was in dental school at Temple. And even then, like, the bills were outrageous. But there was a special program, and I remember talking to him about it. Go work in an underserved area, rural or medical, and, incredibly generous. And over the years, I've just seen so many students that I've worked with that have used these programs to reduce their medical expenses. So let me just share some of these with you. National Health Service Corps, NHCS, they have a loan repayment program. And what it does is it covers up to $50,000 of your medical debt for the first 2 years. And that applies to dentists, physician's assistants, mental health professionals, nurse practitioners, and MDs and DOs. Okay? So you just have to work in an NHCS approved site. And you can go on to the website. You can go to HPSA, look it up, health professional shortage area. And once again, use the inner cities and rural areas, and you can see all the places you can go. It's a 2-year time commitment. And here's the cool thing, because you might be thinking, well, it's $50K. I'm going to need more than that. A lot of times that can be extended. A lot of times they can extend those to 4 years and even beyond, with more repayment of your loans. By the way, if this is of interest to you, just go to nhsc.hrsa.gov to check it out. So that's one program. There's also a program if you're willing to serve in an Indian tribal area. It's called the Indian Health Service Loan Repayment Program, $40,000 for 2 years. And then don't forget this. I talked about this last week. PSLF applies to doctors, nurses, dentists, hospitals, educators, over 12,000 people. Public service loan forgiveness. It forgives all remaining federal debt and loan after 120 qualifying payments. I mean, my daughter Joy has a sizable amount of debt for her grad school degree, but she's working at UNC Chapel Hill, and it's going to just be, abolished after 10 years. So you just have to work at a qualifying government or nonprofit organization, community centers, health centers, rural clinics, public hospitals. That rural. By the way, if you want to know more about that, just go to studentaid.gov/public service to learn more about that. Then there's a lot of state-based programs. Okay. Sometimes these are called SLRPs. They're typically 25 to 50K. And they're very similar to NHSC and how they're administered. And remember, I've already talked about cheap in-state costs. And then you do an in-state program and you're golden. There's also programs with the armed forces. They have health professional loan service programs, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, generous to physicians who end up serving there. And then we do have NIH, which hopefully it'll still be around. But NIH, National Institute of Health, they have various loan repayment programs, up to 50,000 health professionals that do clinical research in underserved populations. And that can also apply to people that go into public health. There's all kinds of programs. I can't even mention them all. There's so many of them. But another really cool one is the Teach Health Center Graduate Medical Education Program. Okay? Now, that's not technically a loan repayment program directly, but it funds residency training in community-based and rural settings. So that ends up reducing debt. So there's just a lot of programs. California's got a really great program called Cal Health Cares. And that Cal Health Cares program, up to $300,000 in loan repayment if you work, at one of their approved locations. New York's got a special program called Doctors Access New York. That's $120,000 for 3 years. Texas has a program, $180,000 for 4 years. And then there's many other states that have these robust programs, including Michigan, Washington, and North Carolina. And then the last thing I want to mention is a lot of students do get just scholarships for med school, apart from these special programs that are formalized. There is a merit scholarship money out there for people that, going into the medical profession. With one of my students a while ago, and he went over all of his options, and, he ended up having 5 options, good options. And I mean, Emory took care of him. He got really great merit money from Emory, so that's where he went. So, Nicole, don't let your dream and goal and desire to be a doctor be influenced at all because of this. My advice to you is to research all these options so that you know where they are, all of them, from the free ones to the merit scholarship ones to the low in-state costs to the cheap out-of-state costs to the public service loan forgiveness to the special programs if you serve in rural areas or in inner city areas. And, don't let what's happening in Congress, douse your fire. Keep that fire going. There's one other thing I'm going to say. There's a shortage of health professionals in this country. And as you continue to see more and more and more of a shortage, people need health care. I expect that you're going to see even more special programs over time because you got to have nurses, you got to have doctors, you got to have dentists, right? You just have to. If you're going to be a healthy society. So I anticipate probably even more of these programs. I don't know that for sure, but it's what I'm expecting. So keep your dream alive, Nicole. All right. I mentioned to you that I was going to share a couple essays that students wrote that were the worst 2 I've ever seen. So one of them was a custom prompt. That was 2023 for Stanford. And Stanford has, they have a question on their app. They've had it for some years now where you have to basically write a letter to your roommate, and it's actually a clever way for an admission office to get a sense, you're always trying to learn about the kid, right? That's the purpose of the application. Try to learn new dimensions to the kid. So write a letter to your roommate. And what would you say about yourself? I kid you not. I had a student, and pretty soon into her essay for Stanford, she says, I hope you know I will use your toothbrush. That's just what I do. I'm not kidding. I will use your toothbrush. That's just who I am and what I do. And it got worse from there. I mean, at one point she said, and if you're dating somebody, I will be all up in your business. That's just who I am and what I do. Now, this is a great kid, by the way, who I absolutely loved working with. And she didn't get in Stanford, but she ended up getting into one of those 1%er schools that gives merit money. And she ended up getting merit money at one of the most selective schools in the country, which just shows how compelling she was as an applicant. And I give her a lot of credit for this because I try to be positive, but I also try to be direct. And something came out of my mouth and I caught myself, but it was already out of my mouth. I said, I think this is the worst college essay I've ever read. I actually said that. And she actually received that well. I can't believe I said that to anybody. And she received it well. She's like, thank you for your honesty. And we had a good laugh and it was a lot of fun. But I hope I never say that ever again. So that was one. Now, the other was more of a personal statement. And this was a a black student from Atlanta, and he was very conservative, military background, a lot of military background throughout his whole family. And in 2016, you may recall, Trump had won the election, and he wrote a draft of an essay where he was lambasting black people for being upset that Trump won the election. And he was saying, black people need to stop whining, get over it. Trump won, move on with your lives. Like, that's just bad on so many levels, right? It's bad. It's not about you. That was like a morgue in admissions at that time. It was terrible. First of all, there are a lot of women in admissions. Most of them lean more progressive. And a lot of them were understandably excited about Hillary breaking the glass ceiling. So it was really tough, especially at the women's colleges, not just the women's colleges, all over. And so just the thought of somebody reading that, oh my goodness. So I just thought I'd share that. It's just more of a lighthearted moment when I think back of some of the funnier things that have happened. By the way, that was also a fantastic student who went on to get into a number of really, really selective schools. And I only mention selective schools not because they're better. It just shows that he was a compelling applicant to get into the schools that he got into. I'm not going to tell you where these students went because I don't want anybody to figure out who I'm talking about. But, that student got into one of the 30 most selective schools in the country. And he's just a great kid and a great person. But and I just don't know what he was thinking in the first one. I don't know what she was thinking. And thought I'd share that as a more of a lighthearted moment. All right. I said I'd give you a tip. So writing's on my mind right now because that's really, for most people, that's what's going to take up most of your time if you're a rising senior. I'm assuming by now you've got your college list. I'm assuming by now you're done with your test scores. And if you're not, maybe you're taking it one last time in August and then you're done. So like those parts, you may remember I did an episode on the most time consuming parts of the college process, right? And a lot of it was research and writing, right? Research, all the things you learn about the school, including building your college list. And then the personal statement takes a long time, but hopefully people are done with that by now. And now you're turning your attention to the custom prompts. And a lot of schools are going to ask you a Y essay. Sometimes people call this a Y essay. Sometimes they call it a Y us essay. Sometimes people call it a Why this school essay. You'll hear admission officers have lots of different names for this. And the thing about Y essays is they're actually really hard to do well. They're really hard to do well. Julie and I have talked about this a little bit on here before. What makes them so hard to do well? Well, I'd say three things make them hard to do well. One, students underestimate the specificity that colleges expect. True example, I'm visiting U Chicago 2023. And by the way, they do a great information session. One of the better ones out there, in my opinion. I love it when these information sessions give kids kind of tips, right? And so they're talking about their YSA and they're like, please don't say you're coming here because we're by a lake and we have computer science and we're in a city. Please don't say that. They said there's 43 schools in Chicago. They're all by lakes. They're all in the city and 38 have comp sci. Now, the average person would actually think they're being pretty specific by saying, I like that you're in a city and you're by a lake, and you got computer science. That's not going to cut it. So one reason they're hard is the level of specificity you need. Another reason they're hard is because students don't realize that the YSA is actually about them and not the school. So people go on and on about the school and they don't make the case why they're a good fit for what the school has. And YSAs are more about you than they are about the school. Remember, college is trying to learn something about you through every part of the application. So people don't effectively use them to reveal new things about themselves. Or if they say something about themselves, it's oftentimes somewhere else in their application. So it's a waste of time. They don't learn anything. But there's a third reason why they're hard. And that's because, let's say you're an average admission officer reading between 1,000 to 2,000 applications a year. And those numbers are all over the place, by the way. There's people that read more than 2,000. There's people that read under 500. But the average person working full-time is going to read 1,000 to 2,000 a year. With the personal statement, you do get a lot of variety. People are talking about all kinds of things. I mean, most of the students that I work with are writing on something that nobody else could have that topic. So it's going to be novel. But you're reading the same essay over and over. Do you know how easy that is to bore the admission officer? When I was at Colorado College, they said, please don't talk about that we're by the mountains. When I was at UNC Wilmington, please don't talk about that we're by the ocean. I mean, these are things people hear over and over and over and over and over again. Now, that doesn't mean you could take some component of it in a novel way and talk about why that's important to you. Maybe a unique internship that they offer in local hospitals or blah, blah, blah. You're like, yeah, there's a way you can do it. But so those are why the essay's hard, right? And sometimes they're 150 words, which you might think, oh, no sweat, 150 words. Comment up at personal statement was 650. It's hard to write those 150s. So this is just a tip. You're always looking for something about the school that, one, you authentically value, two, the school prides itself on as being something that distinguishes them, or at least a unique feature of who they are. And then you make the case why that's important to you. I mean, it's going to pop more if it's not something that someone's read 50 times or 350 times. So one place to get some good nuggets is to go look for speeches from the president of the school, provost, head of your department. And a lot of times they'll reveal some things and you can pull a little nugget out of something that one of those leaders says about the school that, once again, you value, and you explain why that's important to you. And not a lot of people are going to do that. So it shows your level of research. Remember, these essays are partly testing DI and DU. DU, demonstrated understanding. Do you get who we are? DI, demonstrated interest. LTE, are you likely to enroll? Did you do your homework? Do you know us? So that's why they can be popular, because they test both DI and DU all in one essay. So just a little tip. All right, let's transition to my final part, my interview with Chris Teare.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, we reached the final part of my interview with Chris Teare. And in part 4, I asked Chris when he tells people to submit and not submit their test scores for test optional schools. Chris talks about mental health and loving your child. Chris and I talk about how college visits to high schools and how they've changed, and how counselor calls have changed, and the various reasons why colleges are not making the counselor calls they used to make. And Chris goes on the hot seat in our lightning round. Listen and enjoy. Let's completely go in a different direction. So the question that we get asked a lot is, should I submit my scores? And there's some people that will say, well, are you at the median test score for that school? And there's others that will say, no, it's not the median. Are you in the middle 50? Did you at least make it in the middle 50? And there's others that will say it's not about their college. It's about your high school. Where are you in relation to your high school? You may not be, you may be top 5 or 10% at your high school, and you're not anywhere near the middle, or maybe not even the middle 50 at the colleges, but schools are going to judge you from the context of your high school. Then there are others that are going to say, well, what about your major? If you're majoring in engineering, you don't want the low math. What's your advice for families? It's a question that comes up all the time, and I'm trying to throw some of the hard ones out at you that I get in my personal counseling and that we get on the podcast, and pick your brain, Chris.
Yeah, fair enough.
This one is nuanced and tricky.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's like so much.
Yeah.
The only good answer in the college process is it depends, and it depends upon the school. It depends upon your high school. It depends upon your declared major. And generally speaking, I want kids not in the middle of the pack. I want them in the top 25%. I want them, stronger than most of the kids on the campus, without any doubt. And, what you're saying about the engineering or computer science or STEM, if you don't have a really high number on that math, you're begging for trouble to send that score in. And, I have had an experience where a student had a very strong score relative to the other scores in that school, but it still wasn't compelling to send into the context of a public university honors program. They clearly didn't care that that kid was one of the top scorers in that high school. They just wanted the highest scores possible, no matter where they came from. So, I'm on the play it safe side where standardized testing is concerned.
Thank you. Chris, we're about to wind down here. Anything you haven't shared that you want to share? A lot of parents listening, a lot of moms, kids in 10th, 11th.
Yeah, I think the big things would be that mental health concern, just really loving your child and helping your child conduct the process in a way that is authentic and meaningful, step by step. Just, you know, let the let things emerge as are right for your individual child, and try to check your own educational experience. Try to partner with your school counselor or your independent counselor and be the adults to model how to engage in this process, and also be aware that there are disappointments in life. And, when my dad took me to talk to the Yale coach 50 years ago and he made clear that he had no interest in me, that could have crushed my spirit, but it led me to find Division III schools that were eager to have me. And you're going to be told no at different points in your life, for college, for grad school, for jobs, for any number of things. And we adults have to model how to handle that, and know that things have a way of working themselves out. Like my brothers and my friends who didn't get into their first college choices and ended up having great college experiences and great lives. And, on my email signature, I have the title of Frank Bruni's book,
Oh,
Where You
yeah.
Go Is Not Who You'll Be.
Yeah.
And I commend that to everyone who is entering this process or is in the process, just for a sanity and a measured understanding of how things, if you take each thing one at a time, the process will have a way of working out to a result that really is right for you. And it started off for me very, very personal. And what I try to do, and what I hope we can all do, is keep it as personal and individual as possible in a time of data, of algorithms, of institutional priorities, and a process that has become almost entirely opaque at the truly selective schools. I mean, even, when I got back into college counseling in the early 2000s, I could have counselor calls. I could find out in real time who was getting in where. I could advocate in real time. I would get embargoed information so I knew what was coming right before the December holiday. So I could look out for the kids who were going to be hurting and avoid the kids who were going to have good news because they'd be screaming and I could give them a hug later. But that doesn't happen anymore. It just doesn't. And so we all have to care for the young people in our mutual care, counselors and parents together, and
And
preserve
if
as much
listeners are
humanity as we
wondering
can.
what Chris is referring to, schools have greatly reduced their counselor calls.
Yeah.
They've also greatly reduced their school visits. And that's been happening for a while. I remember literally 20 years ago when I was at Westtown having a conversation with Susan. Boy, people aren't visiting as much as they used to.
Yeah.
Or if they
Yeah. No.
if they were in every year, they become every third year, and
Yes.
kind of thing. And so and the counselor calls, what would you say, the last 10 years? It's
Yeah, they're
really
gone. They're
yeah.
they're they're gone at any place that is accepting 25% or less. As you start moving toward 50% or more, then they'll talk. And, one of the things, I first became aware of the Independent Educational Consultants Association in 2003, went to the Summer Institute out of curiosity. but didn't join until a couple of years ago. The one of the things that's been fascinating that I've been asking about over the last few years is, where are you, college X, Y, or Z, on the continuum of we talk to independent consultants or we don't? And it's basically the more selective the school, the less likely they're talking to us or anybody else. And as you move toward 50% or more acceptance rate, the more they're talking to counselors and independent consultants, because they're trying to enroll a class of qualified kids whose parents will pay enough of the sticker price to make sure the net tuition revenue works. And so that's where, it depends.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. It's also really complicated. I had lunch with a Stanford admission officer a while ago. Um, you probably know Rick Shaw has been
Oh yeah.
very anti IEC, and of course they had Varsity Blues, which was just brutal for them too. But
Yeah, I had breakfast with the Stanford sailing coach a few years before he became the only sailing coach caught up in that whole thing. And I've read his book, Rig Justice, and I feel for him because I think he got set up by that situation. I've known Rick for 20 years, and I could tell you some pretty funny Rick Shaw stories.
haha.
But
Well, the interesting, I'm not going to mention this rep's name, but Stanford admission officer who was not Rick Shaw but pretty senior, and he said, you have to understand, if we are networking with IECs, the media will have a heyday with that, because you think the New York Times is going to run an article on this counselor came in that charges this amount, and that's who Stanford is bringing in. So I listen, I try to see all sides of it, and that's one of the things that the most selective, I think, are trying to guard against, where the media can go with that. Because how many of the articles that you read on IECs are about people that are charging just astronomical amounts of money?
yeah, yeah,
Because it gets the clicks, right? Like,
yeah,
like
yeah,
there's not the vast majority of IECs charging those fees out there that you read, but those are the ones that get the articles. So it's a really complicated issue. I do think sometimes people are missing out, and people that could refer a lot of great kids. But I kind of try to see, I think I see both sides on that one. It's kind
yeah.
of like, it's like the other question of, do you tell your private school counselor that you're working with an IEC? Very nuanced, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
again, it
yeah,
depends.
very nuanced.
The,
Yeah.
the the thing, I mean, the media scrutiny that's real. I mean, I was quoted in an article in Town and Country magazine in March, and the title and the photo are typical sort of Town and Country, the college counselor rock star diaries. I mean, good Lord. And, it's a private jet with the red carpet getting up, on the college counselor. And some of what's in there just is what you were just saying. I
Yeah.
tried to add a little bit of sanity to it, I hope. But the thing I also see with regard to the counselor calls and the communication is a bit of the demonstrated interest in interviewing thing, which is both philosophical and practical. Some places seem to have taken the view of, if we can't talk to everybody, we're not going to talk to anybody. And only independent consultants and private school counselors and the most sophisticated public school counselors in affluent districts, even though counselor calls are a thing. And, philosophically, we don't think it's fair. It's an unfair advantage. And the same with demonstrated interest. Only the sophisticated families really know demonstrated interest is a thing, and it's so important. So, a lot of the most selective places say, we're not taking that into account, because some of the kids we want to recruit have absolutely no idea this is a thing. And interviewing, the same way. We do, as a practical matter, we can't talk to everybody. We just we can't handle it. So we're not going to talk to anybody, because it could create an unfair advantage. So I think there's some of that as
Oh, there's
well as,
definitely a lot of that. Like, anyone I've
yeah,
ever talked to that's dropped their counselor calls, that's mostly what they say.
yeah, yeah,
Like it
yeah. I
was.
know one of my favorite things to tease the big bosses and admissions about is, okay, you're very proud of how much your applications went up every year. Has your staff increased by the same percentage? You know,
Of
and of course it hasn't. And,
course.
you know, they tell me about committee-based evaluations, and I'm like, yeah, right. So you got the same number of eyeballs with more applications. I don't care how you divide the labor, you can't tell me that the staffing is sufficient. And I know they hire part-time readers, and I know some of them are better than others, but they're not full-time admissions officers. And I
Of
question
course,
some
a
of
lot of
what
times
goes
it's
on.
not their call. Like they would love to have the bigger
Oh yeah,
budget to do it, right? It's not, they're not the ones saying, I don't want any more people.
yeah. Oh, I know. But you know, one of the things you know that you and I have both witnessed is that road warrior job is really hard and
Yeah.
it's badly paid,
Yes.
and so there's a
Uh-huh.
lot of turnover.
Yeah.
And, you know, I got to the point in my last couple of years at Wardlaw Hartridge, which is sort of in what I call drive-through New Jersey. It's very close to where the Parkway and the Turnpike cross. And it's not really a Manhattan bedroom community. It's not really a Philly bedroom community. It's not affluent Princeton. And I would look at these reps, and a lot of it was Zoom after COVID, and I'd say, have you ever been to New Jersey? Do you know where we are in New Jersey? And then based upon what I heard, I would give them a little briefing on New Jersey, our part of New Jersey, our student body, to just provide them some context. And, you know, I felt at a certain point, like I was training 22-year-old, 23-year-old admissions officers who had just graduated and were representing their alma maters. And I admired them very much for their energy and their enthusiasm, but I knew they didn't know a whole bunch of stuff that they needed to know.
Chris, you've heard our podcast multiple times. You know we have a tradition. No first time guest gets away without going on the hot seat in what we call our lightning round. So let's do it here. What do you wish your 18-year-old self knew?
How to be a more serious minded student who would use the advising and the opportunities before him to choose classes in a more mature fashion. I spent a lot of time playing football, lacrosse, beer pong, you know, singing in the glee club, you know, joining a fraternity, you know, doing all these other things. I had the sprinkles on the donut. And I wish I had been a more mature student. Now, I was blessed when I left television news to spend 4 summers at St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, and read the great books of Western civilization. And actually, without all that other stuff going around, sit in a chair and do the reading. And read Platonic dialogues twice to have any idea what was going on, and read Kierkegaard and Kant 3 times to try to
Mm-hmm.
have any idea what was going on. So I think it would be maturity,
I
academic
like
in
it.
particular.
I like it. Lighthearted one. What's the worst purchase you ever made?
um, well, some would say the first car I ever bought, which was a Renault Le Car, which
Okay.
someone said had a lawnmower engine, but it did go all the way to California from New Jersey and back successfully. And I did blow out a ball joint way out west, and the thing slid to the curb. And I talked to the mechanic who was fixing it. I said, that ball joint had gone out on the highway. What would have happened? And he looked at me and he goes, well, you wouldn't have had anything else to worry about.
That's one way of looking at
I was like, oh, oh.
What? How do you relax? How do you chill?
Spending time with my wife at our beautiful home in here in Connecticut and our condo near the Gulf of Mexico in Florida, and playing tennis.
Oh, look, that'll keep you young.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. What's on the bucket list?
You know, I don't have one. You
Really?
know, I really,
Is there any place you want to get to that you haven't been?
you know, I've been so fortunate, you know, to travel widely that, you know, I don't think it is. I guess the one thing I hope and pray for would be at some point, healthy grandchildren.
Sure. Sure.
But my three daughters, my two stepsons just aren't there yet. And so I never, ever say the word. And please feel free to edit that answer out of this in case they find it, because I don't want them to feel any pressure.
Sure.
I don't want to be that dad.
I hear you. So you're a reader. You wouldn't sign up for the Great Books program without being a reader. Give our listeners a book or two besides Bruni's book, which we've talked about a lot on our podcast.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be college admissions. It could be sociology. It could be history. But, give our readers a book or two that you think, you know what, this is a good one. You might want to pull this one off the shelf or spend $20 on Amazon and read it. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, God, there's so many books. I mean, the one I enjoyed most recently was Christopher Clary's book on Rafael Nadal. I had read his book on Roger Federer, the
Mm-hmm.
Master,
Oh
and
yeah, you're a
so
tennis player too.
I'm a tennis player, so
Yeah.
I love sports biographies, and very meaningful to me. Another book that I read this spring that I enjoyed is Chris Bajalian's The Jackal's Mistress. Chris Bajalian has written about 25 novels, and he was one of my dorm advisees a long time ago. So I've read a few of his. And The Jackal's Mistress is taken from a true story of a Confederate woman, or the wife of a Confederate soldier who was in a prison camp, and she wasn't sure if he was even still alive, caring for a Union officer who was badly wounded in the Shenandoah Valley. And it was an interesting contemplation of a time when the country was torn apart, but still there was humanity there, and it's from a true story. And so I read that this spring and really enjoyed it. Um, I mean, my God, how many books could we talk about? Trying to think of other things I read this winter, but those are probably the two I've read most recently.
No problem. Last question. What's your advice for parents, students, college counselors? Our three stakeholders, the listeners, if you want to put it that way. Parents, students, college counselors. What's your advice?
Care for yourselves and those you love, and you know, take things one at a time. When I was a lacrosse coach, when I worried about the banner going up for another championship, the team fell apart. When I looked at the guys and said, pick up the next ground ball, things worked out pretty well. So, you know, care for each other, care for yourself, do the best you can, and, let the results of this process done properly take care of themselves. Especially during COVID, I started reciting the Serenity Prayer in
There
some
you
of
go.
my conversations. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And there were things during COVID that were just completely out of our control. And there are things in the college process that are completely out of your control. You have no control of who else applies. You have no control over the institutional priorities of an institution in any given year. All you can do is your own very best to get to know yourself, to research your options, present yourself as authentically and powerfully as possible, and then the results will be what the results will be.
Chris, thank you so much. You've been most generous, giving us an hour and 40 minutes of your time. We really, really appreciate it. Keep up the good work, and I hope to see you at the No Name Conference here coming up in 2026.
That'll be great. Mark, thank you so much for this opportunity. I truly enjoyed it, and I hope this has been of some value to your listeners.
Thanks again. On Thursday's episode, Heather and I will continue with part 2 of 3 of our segment on tips for students with their writing. We have a brand new interview, and it's with Peg Keogh. She's the Chief Academic Officer at College Aid Pro, and we're doing a deep dive on the FAFSA and then the CSS profile. The whole interview lasted almost 2 hours, so I'm going to chunk it out over the next 5 weeks. So you'll hear that throughout August and part of September. And remember, FAFSA and Profile both open up on October 1. So when they open up, if you listen and take notes, you're going to know what to do. So we're going to talk about some missed opportunities when it comes to completing those forms. And then we have another brand new college spotlight. Greg Zeiser is back, but this time he's not talking about demonstrated interest. Greg's talking about Elon University, a college spotlight on Elon. It'll be a two-parter. Greg's the chief enrollment officer at Elon, been there 36 years, and got really great feedback on his part 1 and part 2 on demonstrated interest. But now he's back to talk to us about Elon. Friends, when your student's deciding between a few colleges, just because one college is harder to get in than another, that does not make it the better match or the better fit for your student. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stalionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.